Hello colleagues. In the previous lessons, we did the hard work of identifying and systematizing the security threats faced by AI systems. Now we're taking the next step. From the question, what can go wrong, we move to, how do we design the system so that it doesn't go wrong? Today's lesson is dedicated to the foundational principle of security by design. We'll build a holistic protection architecture composed of three key elements. First, layered controls that form our defensive perimeter. Second, objective metrics that allow us to measure the effectiveness of those controls. And third, managerial gates, formal decision points where those metrics become the basis for moving the project forward. But before we dive into theory, I want to pose a real managerial dilemma that is playing out in companies around the world right now. Imagine a prestigious law firm that in the name of innovation, purchases a turnkey, state-of-the-art AI assistant from an external IT company. The assistant analyzes thousands of documents on a given topic and provides arguments for lawyers to use in court. The assistant consumes a legal data API from a third-party provider that supplies those documents. Soon, an incident occurs. The data provider ships an update and starts adding to its reports additional similar incidents from other jurisdictions, labeled analogy. However, the system does not recognize the new label and generates its conclusions based on these extra data. As a result, the firm loses the case because the evidentiary basis rested on a precedent from another country. The AI developer says, the data provider is to blame, they changed their API, and our contract with you didn't include monitoring their updates. The data provider responds, we notified everyone about the changes, the problem is your system can't handle them. Meanwhile, the client, the law firm, incurs real reputational and financial losses. Leadership is at a loss and hires you as an external expert. Your task is to explain to management what fundamental failure made this situation possible, and what comprehensive plan, structured using our people, technology, processes framework, you would propose to regain control and prevent similar incidents in the future. Jot down your first thoughts in the comments. We'll return to this case at the end of the lecture. What you see before you are not just two objects. They are two philosophies, two worlds, two fundamentally different approaches to building technology. On the left is the world of security by design. Look at this cube. Security is embedded in the architecture itself. It is part of its DNA, elegant and inseparable. In such a system, secure behavior is the default behavior. Its philosophy is simple, proactively prevent vulnerabilities before they appear. On the right is its antipode, the world of reactive security. Here, security is bolted on from the outside, like this rusty shield. This is not architecture, it's a patch. Security here is not a thoughtful plan but a belated response to a problem that has already occurred. It is not prevention, it is perpetual repair, an endless cycle of fixes. The most dangerous thing about such a system is that its default behavior is unsafe. So, what do we choose? A thoughtful architecture, or endless repair? A system with security built in, or a system with security bolted on? The goal of our course is to teach you to think and design systems like the first cube. That's exactly what we'll do in today's lecture. But this philosophy needs a practical starting method. We cannot design defenses in a vacuum if we don't know what we're defending against. In the previous module, we talked about the overall risk identification process and looked at conceptual frameworks like the NIST taxonomy. We also noted that we use different methods to identify risks. When it comes to security, where threats are technical and often non-trivial, we need a rigorous, structured method. We must move from general questions to a detailed analysis of the system itself. This method is called threat modeling. Let's imagine a typical architecture of a modern generative system. At the center is the large language model itself. To answer questions meaningfully, it interacts with an external knowledge base via a RAG mechanism. Essentially, this process retrieves relevant text fragments from a specialized database to provide the model with the necessary context. Finally, the system may use external tools, APIs, and services. Trust boundaries run between all these components. Our task is to map onto this architecture the threats we already know. For example, we understand that indirect prompt injection attacks target the knowledge base and RAG link. We know supply chain attacks, like our previous lesson BankBot case, strike the tools component. And multi-step jailbreaking is aimed directly at the model itself. Threat modeling is not just an analytical exercise. The outcome of this process is a specific, mandatory artifact, the attack surface map, where we record all such security threats. This is one of the main methods of security risk identification we discussed in the risk management block. First, we create the attack surface map to deeply understand technical vulnerabilities. Then, for each material threat identified on that map, we create a new entry in our risk register. And in the risk register we run the full management cycle we studied: assess, establish controls, and verify residual risk. Thus, the attack surface map is one of the key data sources for populating the risk register with security threats. The map provides technical depth, the register provides managerial control and a holistic picture. Finally, the attack surface map serves another critical function: it defines the scope for subsequent validation. It is precisely the threats marked on this map that we will use to plan scenarios for testing and for red teaming, which we'll cover in the next lecture. Now, with the map in hand and the identified threats recorded in our risk register, we begin building our defenses. The core principle here is defense in depth, layered protection. The idea is that no single control is absolutely reliable, so effective protection is always multi-layered. The foundational first layer is artifact integrity controls. Here we answer, what is our system made of, and can we trust these components? We'll talk about the authenticity and provenance of our building blocks, code, data, and models. The second layer is GenAI-specific controls. We answer, how do we govern the model's behavior so that it stays within safe bounds? These are our guardrails that defend against attacks specific to generative systems. And the third, outer layer is context-dependent controls. The question here is, how does the system interact with the real world, and what physical risks does that create? Now let's break down each of these, starting with the foundation. The first, foundational layer is artifact integrity controls. By artifacts, we mean the building blocks of our system, datasets, pre-trained models, code libraries. If these blocks are compromised from the outset, all subsequent protection may be meaningless. Within this layer, particular attention is paid to AI supply chain security. Modern systems are rarely built from scratch. We use off-the-shelf models, open datasets, and dozens of third-party libraries. Each element is a potential attack vector, as we saw in the previous lesson. To counter such threats, we must take strict control of the artifacts themselves. We must be absolutely confident in their authenticity and provenance. To do that, we must first precisely document what the system is composed of. We maintain a short but exact inventory, a specification of AI system components, or an AI-SBOM. It includes information such as the exact model version, checksums of its weights, the sources of key datasets, and the list of dependencies. Here is a critically important clarification: a component specification by itself is not a control, it is an inventory, the foundation for controls. The real controls are the actions we perform because we have that list, verifying hashes and digital signatures at deployment to ensure component authenticity, automatically scanning listed dependencies for vulnerabilities, arranging secure storage and access to those artifacts, and, in an incident, rapidly and precisely recalling the compromised component. How does this instrument integrate into our governance system? Simply, in the AI System Passport we store a link to the current component specification, and it is a mandatory part of the gate package. Thus, it is through the linkage of the AI System Passport with the SBOM Plus controls that we build our first and most important line of defense, ensuring transparency and controllability across the entire supply chain. Now let's move to the next layer of defense. The second layer is GenAI-specific controls, what we call guardrails. This is not just a list of rules but a complex, dynamic system of filters and barriers that surround the model itself. Their task is not to limit the system's capabilities but to channel them in a safe and productive direction. Let's look at 4 key guardrail types. First, input and output filtering. Think of this as an intelligent semantic firewall. On input, it analyzes user prompts to detect and block malicious attempts. On output, it inspects the model's generated response before showing it to the user. This filter looks for several things: leaks of confidential information, personal data, or proprietary code. It also checks for alignment with content standards, toxicity, incitement to hatred, or creation of dangerous content. Second, context and secrets isolation. This is a fundamental principle of secure architecture. It is tempting to pass an API key or password to the model in the prompt so it can perform an action. But that must never be done. The model can accidentally disclose that secret in another answer. It can land in logs and become exposed. The correct approach is that the model never sees such secrets. It only expresses an intent, for example, get weather for Paris, and an external, controlled orchestration layer takes that intent, fetches the needed API key from a secure vault, makes the call, and passes back only the result: Paris is 15 degrees Celsius and cloudy. Third, sandboxed tool use. When we give an AI agent access to external tools, a calculator, a search engine, or an internal database, we must proceed from the principle of least privilege. The agent should have access only to the functions and data absolutely necessary for the task. Technically, this is implemented via a sandbox, an isolated, protected environment that prevents the tool or agent from escaping its boundary and impacting other parts of the corporate infrastructure. Fourth, automatic redaction of personally identifiable information, PII. Although this is part of filtering, it is so critical for legal compliance that it merits its own control. It acts like an automated black marker, finding and masking or removing personally identifiable information, names, phone numbers, addresses, document numbers, in both user prompts and model outputs. This is a crucial barrier against personal data leakage. And finally, the third, outer layer of defense, context-dependent controls. Here we move from digital risks to physical world risks. Security is not universal. Requirements for a poetry-writing chatbot and an AI controlling an industrial robot differ radically. At this layer, AI safety converges with classic approaches from physical engineering safety. The goal of these time-tested methods is to guarantee that the system will not harm people, property, or the environment. In essence, we create the last line of defense that must work even if the AI model itself behaves unpredictably. Let's consider 2 key mechanisms. The first is action filters. This is a hard-coded logic layer interposed between the model's decision and its physical execution. Imagine an AI drone routing system decides to fly through a no-fly airport zone. The model can generate such a command, but the action filter, preloaded with the coordinates of restricted zones, will simply block execution. It's a veto power the model cannot override. The second is a kill switch, an emergency shutdown mechanism. This is our final line of defense. The kill switch is an independent circuit that enables immediate, guaranteed stoppage of physical processes controlled by AI. Crucially, this mechanism must lie outside the model's software loop. Ideally, it can even be a physical button accessible to an operator. This ensures that even in a total software failure or unpredictable behavior, we still have a reliable way to prevent catastrophe. Such mechanisms are mandatory for robotics, autonomous transport, and critical infrastructure. All these controls are key to implementing defense in depth. However, implementing controls alone does not guarantee safety. This brings us to the second pillar of our approach, evidence-based governance. We must shift from assumptions, I think the system is safe, to verifiable facts, I can prove it's safe, here are the numbers. To do that, we need metrics, which we can divide into 2 categories, validation and operational. The first category, validation metrics, we use during pre-launch testing to understand overall readiness. Let's examine 3 key ones. The first metric is robust accuracy. It is directly tied to robustness and answers. How much does model performance degrade under adversarial attack? We measure its accuracy on ordinary inputs and then on a set of adversarial examples. The difference between these values shows the model's robustness. The second metric is attack success rate. It evaluates the effectiveness of our defenses from the attacker's standpoint. In controlled testing, we launch thousands of simulated attacks and measure what percentage succeed. This is a direct indicator of the strength of our guardrails. And the third is a managerial metric, test coverage. It answers, are we testing the right things, and in sufficient volume? We align the attack surface map created during risk identification with the vectors we actually exercised during testing. The second category, operational metrics, are tracked continuously, in real time, once the system is live. Think of them as a dashboard. What do we want to see there? Refusal rates, how often the system declines to answer because of safety policies. Jailbreak rates, the percentage of requests detected as intrusion attempts. For example, we can set a threshold. If the daily jailbreak rate exceeds 0.1%, the system should raise an alert. Toxic content rates, the share of toxic content in responses. Here the threshold should be even stricter, for example no more than 0.05% per day. And for RAG systems, factual error rates, for example the percentage of factual mistakes in answers grounded on external data. For each metric, our AI system passport must specify accountable roles, for example, via a RACI matrix, and clear threshold values. Now that we have reliable controls and objective metrics to evaluate them, a central managerial question arises: how do we turn those numbers into real decisions? That is the purpose of managerial gates, formal decision points in the product lifecycle. Roles are distributed according to our 3 lines of defense model. The second line, risk management and AI governance, sets the rules, for example defines metric thresholds. The first line, developers, ensures they are met. The third line, audit, verifies the effectiveness of the control process itself. And it is precisely the second line, relying on data, that has the right and obligation to stop the process if the system doesn't meet established risk standards. All these pieces of evidence, our attack surface map, AI-SBOM, test results, and metric dashboards, are the central part of the gate package that the team provides for decisions on transitions between lifecycle stages of our AI product. We covered this in detail in the lessons on the AI system lifecycle. Now let's return to our case and imagine ourselves as experts preparing a report for the law firm's leadership. The first instinct in a crisis is to find who's at fault, the developer or the data provider. But that is a false path. The blame game is a symptom, not the disease. The fundamental failure happened long before the incident. It occurred at the very first stages, strategy and planning, due to the absence of governance, and it passed through every subsequent stage. If you haven't taken the lessons dedicated to the AI system lifecycle, I strongly recommend reviewing them. The lawyers formulated functional requirements. We need an assistant that searches and summarizes cases. Finance added budget constraints. IT added integration requirements. All this was packaged into a technical specification and handed to an external developer. The result, the specification turned from a project for a trustworthy, reliable AI system into a simple wish list. The developer did exactly what was asked. The external supplier also fulfilled its contract as written. Thus, the root cause of the incident is that the earliest stages did not embed the key principles of working with modern AI systems: governance, security, and privacy by design. It is precisely this governance vacuum that led to all subsequent consequences. So what comprehensive plan can we propose to restore control? Our plan must aim to build the missing expertise and governance system. We will structure it using our key framework and begin with the most important element, people, because it was the lack of accountable, competent people that was the primary cause. Technologies and processes are lifeless without accountable people. We recommend creating an internal team or role within the law firm responsible for AI governance. These people will own all subsequent processes and technologies. We also conduct training for all stakeholders, for leadership, on AI risks and accountability, for lawyers, on the proper use of AI tools. Now, at the process level, with owners in place, we implement the rules of the game. We initiate creation of the AI system passport as the central document, along with the risk register. We evaluate and revise contracts with vendors, making change control procedures mandatory, spelling out notification requirements for such changes, and the response and system update measures. We also introduce a process for mandatory senior lawyer verification of critical reports. Finally, at the technology level, we select tools to implement these processes. We require implementation of an automated filter that technically enforces our data contract. Anything that doesn't conform to our schema goes to quarantine. We also create and deploy our own monitoring system, let's call it jurisdiction accuracy. If that metric drops, our internal team receives an alert, and we execute our predefined response playbook. It may seem we have fulfilled the assignment. But I want you to pay special attention to the following. As an external expert, I must give leadership one more, most important recommendation, and it may not be very attractive. Even after implementing all the measures above, I would not recommend resuming full operation of the system. Why? Because by fixing this problem we would merely bolt on another patch. We would shift into the reactive security mode we discussed today, fixing what has already broken without knowing how many similar landmines are buried in the system. The data issue is just a symptom of a fundamental illness, architectural defects caused by governance gaps at the start. Until we assess the extent of those gaps, we are sitting on a powder keg. Our system cannot be considered trusted AI, the standard we study throughout this course. My main strategic recommendation to leadership will be, temporarily move the system into limited operation mode and launch a structured plan to restore control consisting of 3 logical stages. Stage 1, conduct a full risk audit, security, ethics, privacy, and create the key governance artifacts, the AI system passport and the risk register. Stage 2, based on the audit, remediate the system and implement critical technical and operational controls and metrics, and develop and approve the gate system for key lifecycle stages of the AI system. We must also establish a clear incident response procedure. Stage 3, verify the implemented controls to confirm their effectiveness and obtain a body of evidence that the system meets the agreed risk standards. Yes, this will require time and resources, but it is the only path from perpetual repair to building a truly reliable, trusted AI system. This is the shift from reaction to strategy. We need to build a complete AI governance system. So today we designed a comprehensive system of proactive protection. We began with threat modeling and creation of the attack surface map. We then built layered controls with a special focus on their foundation, a detailed AI-SBOM inventory. We learned how to measure their effectiveness through metrics and embedded those measurements into decision-making via managerial gates. It seems we've covered everything. But can we be sure our automated tests have anticipated it all, including human ingenuity and non-trivial attack approaches? For that we need one more final, independent exam, a process that emulates the actions of a real, motivated adversary. This process is called AI red teaming, and it will be the subject of our next lesson. Thank you for your attention, and see you next time.